Hi everyone, and welcome to another crime and punishment story. This week I am covering the story of George Barber and the murder of Dorothy Barber in 1905 at Monkseaton in Whitley Bay. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. George Barber was born in around 1840 in Newcastle to parents William and Jemima. He was one of at least 7 children. He had married Dorothy Dalglish in around 1869 and the couple had at least 7 children together. In 1901 they were living in a house by the name of Grasmere in Hawthorne Gardens in Monkseaton. George was a retired seagoing engineer and he also owned a few properties in the Newcastle area that he rented out to others, and it was said that he was well known for collecting the rents himself. Dorothy, the victim, was born in around 1844. Her place of birth is not entirely known. Some articles say Wallsend, some say Walker, and others say Long Benton. However, it is known that her family lived in the Oil Mill Road area in Walker in 1851. Her parents were William and Mary, and she was one of at least 6 children. At the time of the crime, she was living with her husband and 2 of her children in Monkseaton, where the family had lived for around 12 years. The couple, who were both in their 60s in 1905, was said to be quite well off, living in what was felt to be a quiet, respectable neighbourhood. At around midnight on June the 29th, 1905, Ada Barber returned to her home in Monkseaton that she shared with her parents and her brother to find the house in darkness. On entering the kitchen, she lit the gas mantle. Gas mantles were a form of lighting that were very common in well-to-do households in the early 1900s. She at once noticed a large amount of blood on the floor. She also noticed a small seat in the kitchen had been overturned and that the water tap was still running, but everything else seemed to be normal. She walked towards the pantry and it was here that she found the body of her mother. Her throat had been cut and she was clearly dead. Ada, however, did not notice any other injuries at the time. She then went to find a policeman, and as she was leaving the house she thought she heard the sound of someone coughing and felt that it came from the upstairs area of the house. She assumed that this was her father, but she did not actually go to check. It has to be said that it is strange that she left the house without looking to see if it had been her father who had made the sound. Although she had just found the body of her mother, she does not seem to have checked to see if her father was okay or not, and I can only assume that she feared the attacker was still inside the house. PC Angus arrived from Whitley Bay Police Station. He found the body of Dorothy Barber near the pantry and he realised that she had been dead for some time. It appeared to him that some kind of struggle had taken place in the kitchen, and the pattern of blood on the floor suggested that after she had been attacked, Dorothy had been dragged along the kitchen floor in the direction of the pantry, which is where she had been found. He then searched the rest of the house and he found George Barber in the bedroom upstairs. There was a blood-stained razor and a 6-chambered revolver lying on the floor beside the bed. PC Angus was quick to decide that George was the man he was looking for, and assuming that he was asleep, he woke him and took him to the police station. However, he soon found that George seemed unable to speak clearly, and when charged with the murder of Dorothy, he had replied by saying, "Not that I'm aware of." When checking the revolver that had been on the floor in the bedroom, it was found that 3 shots had been fired from it. A very short time later, when the police surgeon examined George, he was complaining of pain in his head. It was then that the doctor found the gunshot wound in George's head, and he was immediately taken to the Newcastle Infirmary, where the bullet was removed from his skull. George was said to be in a very serious condition and was not fit to attend the initial inquest, which was then postponed for 1 month, even though the doctor was not sure that George would ever recover. However, George did recover, and in August of 1905 he was well enough to attend a special court hearing at the Moot Hall in Newcastle. It was said that although he had recovered quite well, he was still very ill and had to be carried into the courtroom. After a brief hearing, George was remanded to the prison infirmary, awaiting the outcome of the postponed inquest, which was to be held the following Monday. The inquest was held at the police courts in Whitley Bay. George did not attend. A message had been received from the prison that day stating that he did not desire to be at the inquest. Charles Barber said he lived at Grasmere with his parents and his sister. He said that on the day of the crime he had left for work as usual. His mother had been in good spirits and he had not seen his father that day. He said his father did indeed own a revolver like the one shown in the courtroom and that he kept it locked away and he had owned it for around 5 or 6 years. However, he said that his father did not shave and he was not aware of any razors being in the house. Both Charles and Ada stated that their father had appeared depressed for some time, but they had put this down to his ill health. He was under the treatment of Dr. Gibb for his rheumatic problems. They said that just recently their parents had slept in separate rooms because of their father's health problems. Elizabeth Campley, who lived in Whitley Bay, said she worked for the family as their day girl. On June the 29th, she said she had heard the conversation between Dorothy and George about the races that George was planning to attend that day. She heard him say he was heading off earlier than expected. She said that although Dorothy was surprised he was leaving so soon, there was no argument between the couple and all seemed fine. When she left work, she said that Dorothy was in her usual good spirits. Henry Wilson, who lived in Osborne Gardens, said he had known the family for several years. He said that his garden and that of Grasmere adjoined at the back, and he was in his garden at around 6:15 p.m. when George had returned from the races. He felt that by the way George was walking that he had possibly been drinking. He said he remained in his own garden until around 7:15 p.m. and said that he noticed nothing unusual in this time. And when asked, he said that he did feel that George had been depressed for quite some time. P.C. Lordman had taken several photographs from inside the house on the night of the murder, and these were shown to the court and the jury. This was still a relatively new form of evidence, with the first mention that I could find being sometime in 1904 in the UK. However, I don't believe it became widely used until much later. Prior to this, the use of drawings and plans would have been the only way to show where bodies had been found or any other details that the police felt the jury at an inquest or a trial should be made aware of. P.C. Angus stated that he was the first on the scene and had found the body of Dorothy and had also found George upstairs. He noted that there had been no signs of blood from the pantry to the bedroom, leading to the belief that George had shot himself in the bedroom after leaving Dorothy downstairs. He also stated that when George was searched at the police station, he was found to have a small bunch of keys in his possession. P.C. Little stated that he had searched the bedroom at the house and found a small drawer which unlocked with one of the keys from the bunch that had been found earlier. And inside this drawer he found a box of 50 revolver cartridges with 6 missing. Dr. Manners and Dr. Lazenby had performed the post-mortem on Dorothy Barber. They stated that she had died from 2 gunshot wounds to the head. They both believed that the wound to her throat had been made after she had been shot. Dr. Manners said that in his opinion, death had been caused by a fractured skull caused by the bullet wounds. The jury at the inquest very quickly returned a verdict of guilty of willful murder against George Barber, and he was committed for trial in his absence. The trial did not take place until November of 1905. George was still not 100% well. It was said that he appeared visibly distressed and was given a seat to sit on, but he clearly responded with "not guilty" when asked how he pleaded. Charles Barber gave very similar evidence to that at the inquest, only adding that his father had lost interest in things prior to the murder. He said he had won many prizes for his flowers, but this year he had not bothered with them at all, and that he rarely went out. He described a change in his eyes, saying they had a strange look about them now, and he said his mother had noticed this too, and that the family had talked about the changes in his father. He described him as being rather irritable, but that he had never been a man of great temper, and he believed that his parents had had a happy marriage and that they had been married for over 30 years. Ada Barber also spoke of her father's eyes being strange, empty and staring. She said that he had never missed the races and went every year, but she had never known him to be a betting man. She said he had never lost or won money in this way. It was stated that the razor found in the house had been purchased from a Mr. Dunford's in Newcastle by George Barber on June the 28th, 1905. This recent purchase confirmed the inquest statement from Charles Barber that his father had not previously owned a razor. No explanation was given as to why George had purchased the razor. P.C. Angus gave the same evidence as that at the inquest, with nothing new to add. Dr. Manners and Dr. Lazenby gave the same evidence as that at the inquest, with only Dr. Lazenby adding that he felt George had smelt of drink, mostly spirits, when he had first examined him. The defence stated there was only one thing that the jury had to consider, and that was whether or not George had been in his right mind at the time he committed the murder. He said it would be proven to them that on the night of the crime George was suffering from an attack of homicidal mania, or in simple terms, an irrational desire to kill someone. He also stated that it would be proven that insanity was within the close family. William Barber stated that for at least 12 months his father had appeared unwell. In the 3 months prior to the crime he had noticed his eyes were blank and staring, and that he was often unable to hold an intelligent conversation. Although he did add that he still collected the rents for his properties and that the accounts were found to be up to date and in good order. George Barber Jr. stated that his father had, prior to the crime, told him that he thought his time had come and that he was going to die. He said he had told him that he was going to Davy Jones's locker. When asked, he stated that his mother had never mentioned anything to him about his father's state of mind, but that she had noticed a change in his behaviour. It was then stated that William Barber, brother of George Barber Sr., had spent some 6.5 years in the workhouse at Gateshead. It was said he had been quite well on arrival, but his later behaviour and strange outbursts had led him to be moved to the lunatic ward, and it was here where he had died a few years later. Dr. Thomas McDowell, who had been the doctor at Morpeth Asylum for the past 3 years, was asked after examining George if he felt that he had shown signs of suffering from homicidal mania, to which Dr. McDowell said yes, he did. When asked by the judge if this meant he felt that all who committed murder were suffering in such a way, Dr. McDowell said no, he did not. The manner in which George had acted, such a brutal crime and then an attempted suicide, were, in his opinion, classic signs of homicidal mania. Dr. Drummond agreed with Dr. McDowell and said that after his examination of the prisoner he had found him to be emotional, depressed, and that his memory was very poor. And Dr. Hardcastle, who had also examined George, said he felt him to be suffering from some form of dementia. Dr. Gibb, who had been treating George for some 9 months prior to the murder, had been called to give evidence by the judge. He seemed to be the only doctor who felt differently about George. He had been treating him for an unrelated illness and he felt him to be in good mental health. stating that he saw little or no difference in him to how he had been when he had treated him previously, which it seems had been some 15 years earlier. I must add here that I found it quite odd that George's regular doctor saw no change in his behaviour or appearance, yet his family had noticed many things, and the doctors who had examined or treated him since his arrest had all noticed problems too. Either George had hidden things from his own doctor, or he was not a very good doctor. George did not give evidence or speak during the trial. It seems that the defence was certain that he would not have been capable of doing so. The judge then summed up, and the jury retired for 1 hour to consider their verdict. They returned to find George Barber guilty of willful murder with a strong recommendation to mercy. The judge then sentenced George to death by hanging, and that his remains would be buried within the grounds of Newcastle Prison. He stated that he felt the jury could do no other than to find him guilty of murder, but that he himself would support the recommendation of mercy. It was said that George had sat throughout not just the trial but also the sentencing with a dazed, confused appearance. He was removed from the dock and returned to Newcastle Prison. The recommendation for mercy was quickly acted on, although I was not able to find any details of the letter that would have been sent to the Home Office. Within a few days of the trial ending, notice was received from there that George Barber was to be reprieved on the grounds of insanity and that he was to be sent to Parkhurst Prison. It would not be until July of 1906 that George would be admitted to Broadmoor Lunatic Asylum, and it would be here that he would die in December of 1911. I found this to be a really tragic case. George's own doctor had not seen the signs of his true illness, treating him only for rheumatic problems. Would things have been different if he had noticed how ill he really was? His family and even his neighbours had noticed a difference in him in the 12 months before the murder, but sadly none could have foreseen the tragedy that was to unfold because of these changes. It was a terrible end to a once happy marriage and left a family without the parents that they loved very much. Would things be different today? I think we have to hope that they would be. I hope that you have found this sad and tragic story interesting. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.